Okay, so I'll let you start the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, so I can start? Then I start. Okay, yes, thank you very much. I just have to go to presentation mode. Yes, I will be speaking about the flashcard sort of thought experiment and like how the Chinese room argument might apply to large language models. First of all, why would I even ask that question? Maybe just to briefly refresh your memories, what is the Chinese room argument? It's an argument by John Searle against the possibility of basically artificial understanding in symbolic AI systems. The idea is that, okay, John Searle, who's not speaking any Chinese, is sitting inside a room. He's being handed Chinese cards and he's given back Chinese cards. He's translating those cards according to a rule book. And like from the outside, it looks as if he were perfectly fluent in Chinese. However, all he did was sorting meaningless symbols, shuffling meaningless symbols, as Searle says it. And that thought experiment is obviously tailored towards good old-fashioned AI systems, like symbolic systems, which run according to a program and translate symbols to symbols. However, since the 1980s, the state of the art has evolved, and I think it's fair to say that large language models are now probably the best candidates for language understanding. And to my impression, there seems to be an increasing agreement that large language models are so radically different from those 1918 language systems that the Chinese room argument simply doesn't apply anymore. So it was a good argument back then, if it was, but it's just not important today anymore. And with that, I disagree. So what I will be arguing for is the following. If the Chinese room argument successfully demonstrates that implementing a symbolic computation is not sufficient for language understanding, then it also shows that implementing an LLM is not sufficient for language understanding. So the idea really is that if it was a good argument back then, it still is a good argument. I'm not claiming that the Chinese room or the flashcard sort of argument are valid. I'm just claiming there's no easy way out. We cannot just say, well, it was tailored towards symbolic systems, so it doesn't apply anymore. I will be arguing that this is not possible. So let's start right away. Imagine the following scenario. You come across a call for participation for a research study at your university, where it says you were supposed to somehow sort pictogram flashcards, and the researchers are interested in how people from different backgrounds do that, let's say. You find that kind of interesting and agree to volunteer. So then they tell you how the whole thing is gonna go down. They say, yeah, you will be undergoing a 2-phase training program. So during those 2 weeks, you will be somehow taught, you will learn how to sort the flashcards correctly. During phase 1, every morning you receive a parcel containing boxes of flashcards. So every morning you go to the door, pick up that parcel, take out the flashcards, the flashcard boxes, and you get a letter outlining how you're supposed to do that. They tell you, okay, take them out in a certain order and leave 1 box in the parcel. Okay, you do. You take out all the, let's say, 9 or 10 flashcard boxes from the parcel, except for 1 that you leave. And then you get a model book. They tell you, well, that's the book that tells you how to sort the flashcards. Okay, that's the model book. You get that? and look into the model book. And it states precisely the rules how to sort the flashcards. On the left-hand side of your desk, you have the 10 flashcard boxes that you took from the parser. On the right-hand side, you have one fresh, one empty flashcard box. In front of you, as you can see here, maybe on the picture, you have a stack of flashcards, just some random flashcards. Now you look inside, look into the model book, and it tells you, okay, if you have those flashcards or those flashcard boxes on the left, then fill up the empty flashcard box according to those rules. Okay, so you do. Then you have that new flashcard box. Then the researchers tell you, okay, if you have sorted that flashcard box, like your flashcard box, then compare it to the remaining box from the parser. Okay, so you do take both boxes, compare them, and see, okay, there's kind of a difference. Now they tell you, okay, that's where a second rule book comes in. They call it the training book. It has written training on it. And what is that book supposed to do? Well, it states rules how to update the model book. So you look inside the training book to see how to change the rules in the model book. So, and that's then what you do. You erase some of the rules in the model and rewrite them according to what's stated in the training book. The rules in the training book that tell you how to update the model book, they depend on the flashcard box that you just sorted and the flashcard box that remained in the parser. So that's the idea. And that happens every day, over and over again. You receive a parser with flashcard boxes, sort everyone, all of them except for one. Then compare your flashcard sorting result to the one box remaining in the parser and update the rules in the model book according to what is stated in the training book. Okay, that's what you do during phase one. After phase one, the researchers again approach you and tell you, okay, now the procedure changes a little. You again receive a parcel in the morning, which again contains flashcard boxes, but now you're supposed to take all of them out. You're supposed to sort all of them. So the parcel is empty. Take all of them out. And just like the phase before, you take a fresh flashcard box and sort flashcards into that box according to the model rules. You do that, but now you do not only do this for one flashcard box, for one fresh flashcard box, but rather you take every sorted flashcard box to the others, you add them to the others that you took from the parser and start all over again. And you do this for 5, 6, 7 flashcard boxes so that in the evening you have, let's say, 6 freshly sorted flashcard boxes. Those you take, put in the parcel and send back. Now every morning you receive, along with the parcel, you receive one additional flashcard. So you can imagine it being like printed on the parcel. Okay, what are you supposed to do with that additional flashcard? Again, the researchers tell you to update the model rulebook. Okay, how are you supposed to do that? Look inside the training book. Remember what you sorted the day before. And then take a look at the extra flashcard you just received. And then, okay, like your sorting result from the day before together with the flashcard that you received in the morning, the training book tells you exactly how to update the model. Okay, so you do that every morning before you go to work. You update the model rulebook according to what's stated in the training book. Then start the sorting process all over again. In the evening, you send back a parcel full of sorted flashcard boxes. Okay, yes. So that's the idea. After a while, they tell you, okay, now you've finished your training, you finished phase 2. You're now allowed to throw out, to dispose of the training book. You no longer need it. Okay, so you do throw it away. From now on, you only sort the flashcards according to the model book. Every morning you receive a parcel, take the flashcard boxes out, sort flashcards into a new one, and every evening you send it back. So that's basically the idea. That goes on and on and on. Keep receiving flashcards, sending them back. Okay. Now, maybe some of you might have noticed that the proceedings in the flashcard room, like what the flashcard sorter is doing, is analogous to the workings of large language models. Namely, in what sense? Large language models use high-dimensional embedding vectors to represent words. And the flashcard boxes now are somehow similar to those high-dimensional embedding vectors. They contain entries, that is cards, and those cards, unknowns to the flashcard sorter, they represent not really pictograms, but they represent numbers in, let's say, an ancient Egyptian numeric system. So the idea is that you have a box, which represents the vector, full of numbers which represent the entries of the vector. Those together then, of course, represent the words, just like in large language models. Now you can think of the parcel that you receive in the morning as a prompt. Like you have a couple of flashcard boxes in them. Those flashcard boxes, just like the embedding vectors, represent words. So you basically have a list of words. That's the prompt. And in the same sense, the flashcard boxes you send back in the evening, they are your replies. So you can think of the receiving boxes in the morning as a prompt. And the flashcard boxes you send back in the evening, those are your replies. Okay, and now, what's the analogy to the model rulebook and the training rulebook? Well, maybe that has become quite obvious now. The model rulebook tells you how to translate inputs to outputs. That's exactly what the model parameters do in a large language model. Depending on what the parameters, like the weights and biases are, the neural net determines how to translate input vectors to output vectors. So here's the analogy. The model rulebook does exactly the same as the weights and biases in the large language. And the training rulebook, as the name says, that is used to train the model, which is analogous to the various training algorithms in large language models. You know, backpropagation, what have you. Those rules tell you exactly how to update weights and biases, how to update the model. Those two phases, phase 1, phase 2, they correspond to pre-training and fine-tuning. Most large language models are pre-trained on huge amounts of data sets, like on huge amounts of data, on huge data sets, and afterwards streamlined for specific tasks with fine-tuning. And how does the pre-training work? Well, usually large language models are pre-trained by being prompted, and they are to predict the next word that follows. So what the large language model does is it removes one word from the prompt, then predicts its next word, and compares it to the actual last word. And according to the difference between predicted word and actual word, it updates its model, its weights and biases. And that's basically the same that the flashcard sorter did. It took in the prompt, that is the flashcard boxes, compared its sorting result to the last word or the last box in the prompt. Phase 2, the second training phase, like remember the extra flashcard, that corresponds to reinforcement learning from human feedback. So not all, but a couple of or many large language models are fine-tuned by reinforcement learning and human feedback. Here, the idea is you really have humans that grade the responses. So you type in a prompt, you get a response from the large language models. Remember, that's after pre-training, so it kind of already knows what it's doing. And then you give it a grade. Like you think, yeah, that was a pretty solid response. You give it a good grade. If you think, not quite yet, you give it a bad grade. And according to that grade, the large language model updates its rules. And again, that is basically what the flashcard sorter was doing as well. You recall, they updated the model according to the grade, like the flashcard they received every morning, the additional flashcard updated the model. Okay, now that's the analogy with large language. However, the story goes on. Your sorting task goes on for a couple of weeks or months. And after a while, the police show up at your door and tell you to come to the precinct with them. They want to question you. You're curious, why would they want to question me? And they tell you, well, you're being faced with accusations of being part of a terrorist organization. You're like, what? How could that be? And they tell you that those flashcard boxes that you received in the morning, they encoded questions regarding bomb making. And the flashcard boxes you sent back in the evening were the appropriate responses, were your instructions on how to build bombs. And you say, oh, well, no way, that's not what I was doing. All I was doing was just shuffling meaningless symbols according to the rules that those researchers gave me. However, the police is not quite convinced. They think, even though you claim otherwise, you must have understood what you were doing. You must have understood that you were giving bomb plans. And how would they think so? First of all, they can prove that your responses were sensitive to context. Like the model book showed that your understanding evolved with the context. They show you an example. At one point, you received a prompt which said, well, I heard a loud bang, and since I'm emotionally traumatized, that triggered a bad emotion. There was a trigger for a bad emotion. And then you say, don't worry, it was nothing. That's your reply. And the different prompt said, well, what should I best use as a trigger? And your reply was, well, use an alarm clock, usually works the best. And the police argue that in this case, even though both times the same word trigger had been used, you gave very different answers. So at the first prompt, you obviously understood that the person was referring to an emotional trigger. And in the second case, you obviously understood that they were referring to a trigger for a bomb. So they argue you must have understood the context. Otherwise, it's not clear why you would respond so differently to the same word. Okay, you say, well, no, not really. I did not understand anything, but they go on. Okay. They link your training to real experts in bomb making. They could trace back that one additional flashcard you received during phase 2 to experts in bomb making. And then they argue, okay, they know how to build bombs. They basically trained you, like there was direct feedback from experts in bomb making, and still you want to tell us that you didn't understand what you were doing? We don't believe that. And again, you argue, well, it might be that that flashcard came from expert bomb makers. However, I had no idea what it meant. They say, well, still not convinced. Show you a different argument. They say that, okay, we traced back those parcels you received in the morning, and we found out that those flashcard boxes did not only refer to or did not only represent words, Some of them represented pictures, like circuit diagrams for bombs or pictures of bombs. And since you were trained on that, you cannot tell me that you don't know what it was about. Like, you were trained on pictures of bombs, you were trained on circuit diagrams. How could you not know? And you say, well, still all I did was sorting flashcards. But they go on, they say, well, now we've got you. We can prove that there is a structural similarity between the topology of your flashcards or of your flashcard boxes and the structure of the real world. Like, there's a structural similarity. They call that a world model. What do they mean by that? Well, for example, words with female reference, you encoded with very high numbers on the 12th flashcard. Words with male reference, you encoded with very low number on the 12th flashcard. And that is not only true for gender, but for various different features of the real world. They show you that your flashcard boxes actually reflect the real world. Okay, now those arguments of the police are not completely made up. Analogous arguments have been put forward in the literature to the effect that large language models actually might understand what they might have understanding of the language that they use. For example, the idea that context sensitivity might be enough for understanding has been stated by Piandantosi and Hill. Sorry. The idea that reinforcement learning from human feedback might account for understanding had been stated by a recent article from Coelho Moyo and Millet. The idea that world models ground meaning stems from Lyre in an article from last year. And the idea that sensory images, when used in training, might ground the meaning of words, that stems from Vaidya, also in an article from 2024. So those are not made up arguments. Okay, now let's ask the question, well, is that really a sort of a Chinese room argument? Well, yeah, maybe. However, 3 objections have been put forward to the effect that that the Chinese room argument simply cannot be applied to large language models. And why not? Why wouldn't it make sense to even think of such a thought experiment? For example, Chalmers argues the Chinese room argument simply does not apply to subsymbolic systems. Like in the case of Searle, those objects that he was operating on, that he was shuffling, they had meaning. Those were words, like Chinese words, but still they directly referred. Chalmers says, well, subsymbolic systems don't work like that. For example, large language models, what they operate on are just nodes. One node doesn't represent anything, like only a whole vector or a whole bunch of nodes, only they represent. So here, level of syntax and semantic comes apart. And therefore, the Chinese room argument doesn't apply. Another argument that has been put forward is that large language models, unlike the Chinese room, they are trained, they learn. And those people say, well, obviously Searle doesn't understand, he's just following rules. However, humans and large language models, they learn to represent the words. A third point that has been put forward by already mentioned Vaidya. He writes, one might think that Searle's argument can easily be extended to large language models. However, depending on how an LLM is trained, there is symbol grounding in an LLM because semantic items are grounded in images. That's the idea. You feed images into the large language model, and that's basically like a kid looking at a tree, let's say, and attaching the word tree to it. So those are arguments why such thought experiments just don't make sense in the case of large language models. However, now notice the flashcard sorter is a subsymbolic systems. They sort flashcards. which themselves do not represent, only the boxes represent words. They are trained, they undergo a 2-week training program, and they are sensory grounded, at least in the sense that large language models are sensory grounded. Some of those flashcard boxes refer to pictures. So therefore, I argue we can restate the Chinese room argument, say like premise 1, the flashcard sorter implements the computation of an advanced large language model. Premise 2, the flashcard sorter does not understand the prompts and responses. Like, put yourself in their position. And therefore, implementing the computation of an advanced large language model is not sufficient for understanding. And I argue that in this modified version, the Chinese room argument applies to large language models. Okay, those were my references. And if you're like interested in the paper, the preprint is already out. You can find it on the through the QR code here. And now first of all, thank you for your attention. Now, happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Johannes, for your presentation. Very good. I think you maybe deserve a round of applause. Wonderful. Now, if there are any questions here in the room or online, you can raise your hand. Sure, yeah, but you have to come closer.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Can you hear me? Great. So,
Yes.
if you were to sort of single out the most important novelty you bring with respect to LLMs in comparison to the replies that were made to Searle's Chinese room back in the day, right? The most sort of poignant one, not the analogy here, but this analogy in terms of replies, right? What would you say?
Like you mean, which of the replies were like most relevant in the case of large language models?
Right. So the question was, one standard reply back in the day to Searle was, look, maybe Searle doesn't understand when when he's in the room, but the system as a whole does understand, right? And so there was this kind of sort of consensus between many of Searle's respondents that the argument doesn't work. Right. And so if you were to rehearse that with respect to LLMs, right, I'm just wondering, just how do you sort of distinguish yourself from replies that were analogous that were made earlier? Right.
Okay, yeah, now I get the question. I do not really, let's say I'm not capable of distinguishing myself from those replies. Like those replies are just as valid as they were back then. I personally think the system reply probably is the most plausible one. One thing that really might be different, like what I said at the beginning, all I want to say is that the Chinese room argument is just as valid as it was back then. If you think it wasn't valid back then, well, it isn't valid now. I think one thing that might have changed is if you look here at premise 1, saying that the flashcard sorter implements a large language model. A lot hangs on how you define implementation. So that might really be where you could attack the argument. However, really all I want to say is that you could restate that argument in the context of large language models.
Okay, could I maybe have a quick follow-up to that, and then I'll shut up. So the quick follow-up is this. I didn't really hear it explicitly, but it sounded implicit in the flashcard analogy, right? So there's this old tradition. Occam has it. Mill has it, right? To say that, look, maybe at least sometimes the proper object of interpretation aren't words themselves, isn't text, right? Because there could be empty words. There could be, right, there could be thoughts that seem genuinely cognitive, but in fact are just produced by internalizing empty words. And so I'm wondering how you feel that might fare with respect to Searle v. critics, right? And by parity of reasoning with respect to LLMs, right? What if, by contrast to Searle and folks back in the day, right now, what LLMs do is make vivid, right? Make more transparent the idea that, look, the proper object of understanding, of interpretation, of sort of cognizance, of grasp, right, isn't text itself, right? It's something else that we understand, right? Namely, thoughts that might be genuinely cognitive, and in some sense, there's some content to be picked up there. And so text and thoughts that simply internalize empty words, so to speak, would simply not be an object of understanding. And so Searle's contrast might be questioned that way. And so I just wondered what you think about that line.
I do not want to defend Searle too much because I'm not very deeply into his philosophy. To be honest, I don't know. I really don't know what a good reply would be to that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I can see we have a question online. Katalin?
Yes, thank you, and very good presentation, Johannes. Really like it to see how we can bring back to life an old argument. If you can come back to the analogy, because I think this is in the end the key of the argument, the analogy between the model rule book and the model of parameters. Because you kind of put an analogy there, but it feels like the model rulebook, of course, is symbolic, or you may name it sub-symbolic, but the model of parameters is more like how human brain works, actually, than a purely symbolic processing mechanism. So if you can maybe re-argue that they are similar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very good point. So I think probably every one of us, I don't know, most of us probably agree that large language models are better models for the human brain than symbolic systems. I completely agree with that, and I'm pretty certain Searle also would agree with that. The point of the Chinese room argument is not to say that large language models are bad for modeling the brain. They're not. They're like probably state of the art. The point is that implementing that system, implementing that model is not sufficient for understanding. Like Searle's point always is just, if you just implement it, you're basically building a simulation. But simulating a model never is sufficient for having the target system there. Like Searle's example is, think of a model of a rainstorm. If you just simulate that rainstorm, like if you implement it in some sort, that thing won't get you wet. That's how Searle states it. So the point of the Chinese room argument is not to say that large language models are bad models. It's just to say that, like, simulating that model, implementing it is not the same as really instantiating it or duplicating it in some sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Theo, I guess I hope this answered your question. We are running out of time, but I do have a question, if possible, quickly. I can state it. So, if you could make it more clear for us, what's the distinction between the rule book and the training book you suggest, compare with the book of rules from the Chinese room argument, because in my opinion, the Chinese room argument is conceived and crafted for the good old-fashioned AI, yeah, GoFi, and this we can say it works well for this kind of AI, but we can consider that nowadays we stepped into another area, which is of neural networks and machine learning. That's LLM, right? And I get it that you try to craft this kind of training book and model rule book, especially for this kind of functioning with neural networks, right? Yes, but I don't get it exactly what you mean. I mean, what's the difference between them? How you make it special to fit this kind of new environment? Other than the analogy and the metaphoric one, okay, this I get it, but how to implement it? Because LLMs, they do have so many parameters, like billions, right? It's like 17 or 18 billion parameter, if I'm not wrong, for ChatGPT-4. That is a huge number. We can't even imagine how huge it is. For example, if one parameter is 1 second, it will take us like more than 30,000 years. So that's huge. So what's the difference? And yeah, I stop here because time is running.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Obviously, that's a thought experiment, and like no person could ever possibly implement such a computation in any sensible time in their lifetime. The analogy is the following: like, what large language models do is they take input vectors, and via those different layers, they change that input vector. It changes and changes and changes and changes, and in the end, you get another vector of the same dimension, which represents basically the next predicted word. So, and you can imagine that this again is an input-output mapping. Like you map inputs to outputs, input vectors to output vectors. The parameters are all in the rulebook. Like
Okay.
the parameters tell you how to map input to output. Maybe you can imagine it like that. Like you have a very deep neural network. Let's say all have the same dimension, and the first page of the rule book tells you how to change that vector, like the first input vector, to the vector in the second layer. Then you change to the next page, and that tells you how to change the vector in the second layer to the one in the third layer, and so on. And like after 1,000 pages, let's say, you're 1,000 layers deep into the neural network. And on the last page, it tells you how to map that last vector to the output vector. So that's maybe a way you could imagine it. Basically, the rules probably would be something like matrix vector multiplication, where you just change the parameters.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. In my mind, it was more like a book, but not a 2D book, like should be the one for Chinese room, but a multi-dimensional book.
No.
Hugely dimensional, actually. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Unfortunately, we have to stop here and go to our next presenter. Thank you.
Yes,
We'll stop
thank
this,
you.
stop this recording for now and check with our next speaker. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.